setting up the YouTube live stream, and I'm going to start the recording now.
Thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Thanks for joining the workshop. We'll get started in just about 1 minute. Thanks for being here on time. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to the workshop and being so prompt. Welcome to our final topical workshop related to advancing 30 by 30. Today's workshop focuses on advancing 30 by 30 and conservation of coastal waters. It will feature an advisory panel presentation followed by a public input opportunity. My name is Debbie Schechter, and I'll be facilitating today's topical workshop. We'd like to start with some housekeeping items and tips for a successful workshop. The workshop is being recorded for further viewing and will be posted on the website www.californianature.ca.gov. We're also streaming the workshop live on the California Natural Resources Agency's YouTube page. This meeting is being interpreted in Spanish. In order to access the audio channel for Spanish, please press the interpretation button, which is the globe icon on the Zoom taskbar. The button will appear after these instructions. These instructions will be repeated in Spanish, and then you'll be able to join the Spanish language audio channel. I'll now invite our interpreter, Victor Hernandez, to repeat these instructions in Spanish. Victor? Oh, Victor, you're muted.
Thank you, Debbie. Muy buenas tardes. Gracias por reunirse con nosotros hoy en la reunión de conservación de aguas costeras. Le queremos dejar saber a todos ustedes que esta reunión será interpretada en español. Para poder acceder lo que es el canal de audio, haga clic en uno de los botones de interpretación, es decir, un icono del globo aparecerá o un mundo y en su barra de tareas de la plataforma de Zoom. Después aparecerá un menú donde usted podrá entonces seleccionar el idioma del español. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thanks, Victor. We now invite participants to join the interpretation audio channel. So please click the interpretation button, the globe icon in the Zoom taskbar. Closed captioning is also available today. If you'd like to use this option, please click the closed caption icon in the Zoom taskbar and then select subtitles to view subtitles on the screen, or live transcript if you'd like to see the full transcript in the side panel. During the workshop, participants will be muted and off camera until the public input portion. If you need technical assistance, please use the chat button on the Zoom taskbar, and we're reserving chat only for technical assistance. If you're on the phone, dial *9. We'll also share relevant links through the chat feature. Also, if you need technical assistance and you're on the phone, you can dial 858-522-9702. We'll also share relevant links through the chat feature. During the panel presentation today, you may use the Q&A function to send in typed questions. We'll ask the panel to address a few clarifying questions at the end of their presentation. We have many people participating in today's workshop, and we want to make sure that the workshop is as productive as possible for everyone. As we move through the workshop, please follow these guidelines. Please be respectful to each other, to the workshop agenda and the objectives. Threatening, profane, or other inappropriate language is not allowed, and disruptive participants will be removed from the workshop. So we invite you and thank you for your cooperation in making this meeting productive for everyone. Facilitating the public input portion of the workshop with me today is my colleague Ivana Rosas. And joining us from the California Natural Resources Agency are Jennifer Norris, the Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat, and Mark Gold, the Deputy Secretary for Oceans and Coastal Policy and Executive Director of the Ocean Protection Council. And now I'd like to turn it over to Geneva E.B. Thompson, the Assistant Secretary for Tribal Affairs at CNRA, to lead us in a tribal acknowledgement. Geneva.
Thank you so much. We take this time to acknowledge California Native American tribes and people before we move forward in our discussion of advancing 30 by 30 in the conservation of coastal waters. The lands and waters of California are the ancestral lands and waters of over 100 California Native American tribes that contain significant cultural and ecological heritage and importance. The history of California is rich in heritage, culture, and tradition. This history is also fraught with historical wrongs tolerated, encouraged, subsidized, and committed by state actors against California Native Americans. Despite these instances of violence, maltreatment, and neglect, California Native Americans have persisted, carried on cultural and linguistic traditions, and stewarded and protected this land. Acknowledging this place as the home of California Native American people since time immemorial is just a small step we can take in the spirit of truth and healing. We have a lot more work to do to implement meaningful, reparative change, and I encourage each of you, as you engage in this workshop and as you go out into the world, to elevate California Native governments, communities, people, and priorities into your work. Wado.
Thanks, Geneva. Today's workshop, Advancing 30 by 30 and Conservation of Coastal Waters, will explore strategies that California could pursue to conserve 30% of California's coastal waters by 2030 in a way that is meaningful, equitable, and measurable. It will also present advisory panel findings and recommendations, and we'll hear from you about your priorities for conservation of coastal waters. We've inserted a link in the chat to an agenda that you can follow for today's workshop. We'll hear a brief update related to the Pathways to 30 by 30 document. We'll then receive a presentation from the advisory panel, followed by a brief clarifying question and answer session. After that, we'll take a short break, and then we'll begin hearing public input from registered participants. Now I'll turn it over to Jennifer Norris.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm going to provide some background on the governor's executive order that set this engagement process in motion. So in October 2020, Governor Newsom advanced Executive Order N8220, enlisting California's vast network of natural and working lands, forests, rangelands, farms, wetlands, coasts, deserts, and urban green spaces in the fight against climate change, and elevating biodiversity protection as a state priority. Through this executive order, the state committed to the goal of conserving 30% of California's lands and coastal waters by 2030. The Resources Agency, in partnership with other agencies, is developing the Pathways to 30 by 30 strategy, a document which will identify our framework to achieve this goal. As one of the world's 36 biodiversity hotspots, California and its high concentration of unique species are experiencing unprecedented threats. The executive order underscores California's commitment to proactively protect species in decline and leverage actions from the environment to achieve biodiversity conservation and reduce the harmful effects of climate change. Our goal is to conserve 30% of our lands and coastal waters by 2030. And we want to do so in a manner that protects our biodiversity, combats climate change, increases access to nature, and safeguards our economic sustainability and food supply. We are currently working on a draft of the Pathways to 30 by 30 document, which will identify challenges, opportunities, and strategies to achieve 30 by 30. This document is intended to set us on the path to successful implementation. So to be included in the draft document, we really need your input by no later than September 3rd. If you miss this deadline, there'll be an opportunity for public comment on the draft this fall. And we're working toward getting a final document delivered by February 2022. And we'll go over the timeline again in a future slide. So we're also developing the CA Nature Geographic Information System. This is being designed in partnership with Esri to be a publicly accessible suite of interactive mapping and visualization tools. CA Nature will bring together data from multiple different platforms into one shared space. And it will be a tool that we will all be able to use to identify places across California where we will have the opportunity to achieve our biodiversity, climate, and our equity goals. We are really hard at work, but I can't emphasize enough the importance of public participation. It is truly key to the development of the Pathways to 30 by 30 document, as well as CA Nature. We don't do this without your public input and without your input and expertise. So Debbie's going to talk more about opportunities to be engaged in this important work. Thank you all for being here today for our final topical workshop. We really look forward to the panel presentation and from hearing from all of you. Thanks. Now back to Debbie.
Thanks, Jen. Today's topical workshop builds on several previous public engagement milestones, including formal consultation with California Native American tribes and continued tribal engagement activities, ongoing engagement with priority communities and stakeholders, 9 regional workshops that engaged 2,500 stakeholders across the state, and several topical workshops, of which this is the final one, aimed to address key topics and questions and gather your input. We're looking for specific ideas on types of programs that should be included and expanded on, and referrals to any organizations doing relevant work to propel us closer to the goals for 30 by 30. We want to hear from as many participants as possible, and so registered speakers will have 90 seconds to provide input. If you don't get a chance to speak today, or you want to provide additional input, you may send an email at californianature@resources.ca.gov. You can send a letter via postal mail, or you can leave a voice message at 1-800-417-0668. And we'll repeat these options in the chat throughout the workshop. We're also requesting that you consider how you would address the questions posed to today's advisory panelists and provide your input within 1 week of this topical workshop. Now I'll hand it over to Mark Gold for an overview of the topical advisory panels.
Thanks, Debbie. We know that 90 seconds to speak about any of these topics isn't nearly enough. We also know that a lot of people want to weigh in as speakers, so we're doing our best to accommodate as many people as possible. But please do take advantage of the opportunity to share more substantive comments in writing. We really need your comments and suggestions. I hope we can work towards in-person discussions someday soon. In the meantime, thanks for meeting with us here on Zoom, and we look forward to hearing from you. The purpose of these topical advisory panels is to address key topics and questions to support the development of the Pathways to 30 by 30 document and the CA Nature Geographic Information System tool. Workshops held earlier in the summer also informed the development of the Climate Smart Land Strategy, which will be released in the coming weeks. Each advisory panel will produce a summary document that gives context to the topic area, offers technical or other insights, and provides key recommendations. We know we could have chosen so many different people for these panels, and there's tremendous expertise across the state on conservation-related issues, especially for the ocean. So we're also asking the public to provide their perspectives and insights on the topics and key questions being asked of the panel. Hold on. The topics are climate action. On June 8th, we heard from the panel and public on opportunities to address climate change and how to best deliver on the state's goal to achieve carbon neutrality and build climate resilience. Equity. On June 15th, we explored opportunities for the state to advance and promote equity and access through its conservation and climate smart land strategies. Biodiversity. On July 27th, we discussed how to protect and maintain biodiversity through conservation. Conservation of lands, and last week, this panel discussed defining conservation of lands and strategies to do so. And today, we're hosting our final topical workshop related to conservation of coastal waters. We often get asked how the members were selected to be on each panel. We invited the participation of credible, independent individuals with experience or expertise on the relevant topic to serve on these advisory panels. We also selected them to represent a diversity of perspectives, backgrounds, and experience, including geographies. We sought academic and research experience whenever possible, but also practitioners with on-the-ground expertise. Critically important, we look for panelists who could represent a broad array of issues in their field, not just advocates for a particular position or point of view. We did not try to set up a battle of the stakeholders, but a synthesis of the topic and conversation starter. Additionally, we chose the panel's moderators based on their ability to foster a broad, inclusive dialogue that welcomes diverse views. Next slide. Last week, the summary document for advancing 30 by 30 and conservation of coastal waters was released. Hopefully you've all had a chance to take a look at it. The advisory panel and you, the public, have been asked to address several questions related to the biggest threats to coastal and marine biodiversity in California, data and information needs, best practices and lessons learned. The specific questions can be found on the project website, which is being linked in the chat. In a moment, we'll hear from the panel members themselves on these topics as they share their findings with us. You're likely to hear many things you agree with. It's equally likely you'll hear many things you disagree with. This is expected and welcome. We're interested in hearing from the public on how you would address and answer these same questions. Please provide your input to us on this topic as soon as possible in writing or during your testimony today. Next slide. So we have a pretty incredible advisory panel, and it's my pleasure to introduce them. And I really want to thank them up front for all the time and effort that they put into this. These are extremely busy people, and for them to put in this amount of time is really greatly appreciated by the state. So our moderator is Linda Sheehan, and she's the Executive Director at the Environment Now Foundation. Also, she worked with the Ocean Protection Council on the development of our strategic plan. And she comes to us, her background is she's an attorney from Cal Berkeley. So she's a bear. You're going to see a UC theme here. Then you have Professor Jennifer Cassell. She's research faculty and a marine ecologist in the Marine Science Institute at UCSB. And she's helped the state tremendously on kelp ecology, MPA, and restoration issues. And she came from UCSB, so she's a gaucho. Then we have Dr. Jaime Junkie, marine ecologist and director of the California Current Group at Point Blue Conservation Science. And he works on oceanographic processes and climate and their impacts on fisheries and seabirds. He's from UCI, so he's an anteater, was where he got his doctorate. And then we have Dr. Jamil Zamhouri, a marine ecologist and ecosystem science program manager at NOAA, Northwest Fisheries Science Center. He focuses a great deal on climate impacts on fisheries, and he's a Bruin, so I'm happy. And finally, we have Megan Van Pelt, executive director of the Resigini Rancheria and the project lead on the Tribal MPA Stewardship Program. We've really had a great opportunity working with Megan a great deal on that program. So as you can see, it's a pretty amazing group of people, and want to again express my gratitude to them for putting the time and effort and putting together this paper. And now over to Linda Sheehan to lead the panel presentation.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome to everyone listening and participating today. Next slide, please. And please note that at the end of this presentation, we will take a few follow-up questions to clarify points made. So please do add your questions to the Q&A as they arise. The panelists will be sharing a high-level review of the materials in the written report online on conservation of coastal waters. The term coastal waters spans the land-sea interface from marine ecosystems moving inland across the coast and into estuaries. These ecosystems are increasingly threatened by climate change, pollution, over-extraction, and numerous other interconnected stressors. Next slide, please. Just to set the stage, conservation efforts should be grounded in and guided by a goal of a healthy coast and ocean. Our statutes often call for this goal, but we can do more to define it and check our progress against it, especially in the face of shifting conditions caused by a changing climate. Scientists have defined healthy ocean ecosystems as those that can independently and sustainably maintain critical organization or structure, which includes species richness, intricacy of interactions, food web complexity, and social dynamics, and functions, that is the energy, productivity, activity, or growth within a system over time in the face of external stress or resiliency. Jen Cassell will talk more about the importance of a comprehensive understanding of ecosystem dynamics on ocean health. One example of this point is the devastating loss of 95% of North Coast kelp forests due to a combination of ocean heat waves and the loss of key predators from widespread disease. This drove the formation of urchin barrens and cascaded to fisheries closures and significant cultural impacts. A broad understanding of such ecosystem dynamics is needed to take effective and similarly comprehensive action that restores lost ecosystem structure, function, and resilience. Finally, it's important to keep in mind that we and our ecosystems are linked and interdependent. Conservation actions must include examining and modeling human activity as an integral part of California's dynamic and interconnected coastal and ocean ecosystems in order to achieve enduring protection of species of interest, overall biodiversity, and habitat connectivity. I'd like to turn it now to Jen, who will be able to dive deeper into these issues. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Linda. So in order for California to conserve 30% of coastal waters by 2030, the state is going to need to identify and protect and restore ecologically representative marine, coastal, but also the connected inland areas that offer high biodiversity potential. And this is necessary if we're going to meet the overarching goal of a healthy coast and ocean as just defined by Linda. So two guiding concepts while developing strategies to meet that goal are going to be to prioritize protection and restoration of biodiversity as necessary to achieve sustainable management, both now and into the future. And any strategies also are going to be needed, they're going to need to be grounded in a dynamic and a comprehensive view of ecosystem structure and function. So this just means taking into account and recognizing changing climate and other conditions. And also importantly, as Linda mentioned, accounting for all of the interacting parts of the ecosystem, and that's including people, and thinking beyond single species to the functions that are provided by a healthy, intact ocean ecosystem. Next slide, please. So our panel came up with 5 more specific recommendations for strategies to consider, and I'm just going to briefly review those. And these are in no particular order. First is to prioritize marine and coastal areas that have high biodiversity potential. So what do I mean by that? Well, high biodiversity areas, they could be particular habitats that we know now contain high biodiversity, places like seamounts or rocky reefs. But it's also important to think about the future and to try to identify and protect areas that might actually be more resilient to climate change. We sometimes call those climate refugia. Now, California already has an extensive network of marine protected areas, and those are scheduled to be reviewed in 2022. And it's going to be critical that the state learn from those results with a special focus and emphasis on the broader biodiversity goals, and also pay strict attention to the ecosystem linkages and the relationships among species, including humans. So next slide, please. Okay, so given that degradation of some of California's coastal habitats that we've observed recently and even into the past, protection alone may not be enough to meet the ocean health goals. And we may need to rely on management and restoration. So first, a lot of research has shown that the most successful marine protected areas have effective management systems in place. And this is true globally, and it's the subject of a lot of research. And you're going to hear a little bit more soon from my fellow panel members on this. Second point is that part of California's 30 by 30 initiative will need to consider both habitat and species recovery, and should prioritize areas where restoration, especially of formerly extensive habitats, is feasible and aligned with the broader biodiversity conservation goals. Removing barriers to restoration activities in the state, even within MPAs, may facilitate meeting the goals of 30 by 30. Next slide, please. So although our panel topic was coastal waters, we do note that adjacent ecosystems are highly connected, and that linking protection of land and coastal ecosystems, for example, through adjacent terrestrial and marine protected areas, this can really help protect important ecological processes. So co-locating terrestrial and protected areas can provide added benefits that single ecosystem protections may not. So more bang for your buck, if you will. So this co-location and defining linkages should definitely be explored by the state. Next slide, please. So throughout all of these topical workshops, we know that we've learned that biodiversity underpins ecosystem health. And effective sustainable management really requires recognition of this, of biodiversity and all the key players in the system and all of their relationships, not just single species or habitats, which in the past, a lot of traditional management has been based on. California's people and coastal habitats, they're fundamentally linked, and human activities must be managed and reevaluated on an ongoing basis as habitats do change and species move, and in order to protect biodiversity, and also to ensure that the less visible, but the no less important elements of these ecosystems persist. Next slide, please. Finally, and you're going to hear a little bit about this from the next speaker, Megan, from the speaker, Jaime, is to develop and implement and monitor the effectiveness of sustainable management policies. So California has a complex regulatory environment at present. And as part of 3030, current regulatory strategies that touch down on biodiversity conservation and stewardship in the state should be enforced and, importantly, tracked for effectiveness. Strong and frequent evaluation will highlight existing strategies that may need to be strengthened or even completely altered. There's a number of newer law and policy approaches that could be examined by the state. For example, rights-based regulatory frameworks are being increasingly considered for the oceans worldwide. These frameworks reflect the rights of nature itself, the human right to a healthy environment, the rights of Indigenous peoples, including cultural rights, and even legal systems in which ecosystems and species hold enforceable rights to fundamentally necessary resources for them, such as habitats or prey. This toolbox of creative and new solutions could provide effective new approaches to California, not only to protect our biodiversity, but also to further our global leadership in ocean policy. And additionally, and then to queue up our next panelist, Megan, sustainable management policies should be implemented to preserve the healthy habitats that remain in more remote areas, and partnerships with California tribes and tribal communities that have historically stewarded these habitats will be critical to that. So I'd like now to turn the presentation over to Megan Van Pelt. Next slide, please.
Could we have the next slide, please? Thank you, Jen. Thank you. So California's 30 by 30 initiative must partner with California tribes and tribal communities to develop inclusive coastal conservation policies. If you could go back one slide, please. As the original stewards tied to these places since time immemorial, the state should take meaningful actions to increase opportunities for stewardship by tribes of coastal waters within their ancestral territories, as others have mentioned. The state should work with tribal leadership to identify and achieve common goals for conservation. And conservation must be redefined as stewardship that understands people to be a part of natural systems. Next slide. Conservation, as defined towards meeting the 30 by 30 goals, should include collaborative state and tribal actions such as returning coastal lands and waters to tribal ownership, reapplication of traditional management practices and Indigenous traditional knowledge, developing tribal marine management or protected areas, and instituting co-management agreements over coastal lands and waters. Next slide. Key factors of tribal governance and knowledge sovereignty should be considered, and this extends beyond sort of the coastal space, but are important to note. Examples of this include the need for meaningful government-to-government consultation, which is the direct dialogue between the state and tribal governments, free, prior, and informed consent, which includes direct representation at all levels of the state's decision-making process, recognition and consideration of the inherent responsibilities, Aboriginal rights, tribal sovereignty, and traditional lifeways of California tribes and tribal communities. And it's important that traditional knowledge systems are respected. And this includes policies that ensure the gathering, use, and care of that knowledge is conducted by tribes and only shared as appropriate. And I think this is a particularly important point that tribes should be gathering this knowledge themselves and applying it as they see fit. Next slide. There are a couple recent examples in California coastal waters and lands that have focused on the synergy between tribal and state goals to implement conservation measures. And these can serve as inspiration to what can be done as measurable actions towards the 30 by 30 conservation goals if we frame it in a tribal state collaborative lens. One example is the recently launched Tribal Marine Stewards Network, which is a collaboration among 4 California tribes: Resigini Rancheria, Tolowa Dani Nation, the Amamutsan Land Tribal Band, Kushaya Band of Pomo Indians, and the state. And the purpose of this network is to enhance marine stewardship capacity and co-management opportunities. And you can see a picture there on the left of a collaborative meeting that we all held together. And recently, another example is coastal lands that have been returned to 3 tribes who will return traditional management to the landscape. One example being the Kashaya Coastal Reserve. Building from some of the difficult lessons that we all learned when the state implemented the Design of Marine Protected Area Network under the California Marine Life Protection Act, as well as learning from existing models that are seen around the world and here emerging in California. The 30 by 30 effort should provide support and authorizations to foster collaborative initiatives and direct individual actions by California tribes in the advancement of common tribal and state conservation goals. Not only can this approach work towards supporting ecological health and biodiversity, but can also bring immense sociocultural benefits and healing in Indigenous communities, decolonize state-led initiatives, and increase tribal-state partnerships. I'll now turn it over to Jamil to discuss the next recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Building on your message of collaboration and connectedness, I'd like to introduce the next recommendation, which recognizes how much the coasts and oceans have changed, from increased incidence of disease, dead zones, declines in fisheries, changes in coastal communities, impacts of ocean acidification, and more. And these changes are a result of impacts of everything from agriculture to aquaculture to overexploitation and invasive species and more. There's just no single cause. And despite the fact that we increasingly appreciate and understand that these multiple stressors have gotten us to where we are today, we still tend to look at the various pieces of the puzzle in isolation. And this visual on the left-hand side of the slide is just one cartoon of the complexity of the interactions between people and ecosystems along our coasts. But it serves to illustrate just how many of these connections and linkages exist. And so all of these individual pieces are important to keep track of, but this recommendation is focused on tracking the whole as well. And so it reads that we should apply ecosystem-based fisheries management, or EBFM, that considers biodiversity beyond commercially and recreationally important species. So it's not an either or, but rather an all of the above, reflecting the fact that the strength of California's fisheries is really a reflection of the integrity of the entire ocean ecosystem, some of which is represented in this visual. And in order to track and manage the ecosystem that supports the commercial and recreational fisheries in California, adaptive and dynamic approaches that can respond to changes as they occur is really important. And my colleague Jaime is going to talk more about that in a couple slides forward. And just as Megan emphasized, as well as Jen, partnerships and science-based decision-making that are built on ever-improving data and information are needed in order to make EBFM a reality. And if I could have the next slide, please. I think some of these more abstract concepts can be made more concrete through an example. Many of you may be familiar with the fact that in recent years, California saw a more than tenfold increase in the number of threatened and endangered large whales that were entangled in fishing gear. Now, it's often hard to pinpoint the fishery that was responsible for these entanglements, but when it's possible to do so, the Dungeness crab fishing gear is often identified. That is a real issue because this fishery is critical to the livelihoods in coastal communities in California, as it can generate more than $60 million annually and engages more than 500 fishing vessels and many more people across the coast. This entanglement problem was caused by a perfect storm, including an unprecedented ocean heat wave that pushed whale food and the whales themselves onshore into crab fishing grounds at a time when the crab fishery was already threatened by dangerous toxin levels in the crabs that were being targeted and could not be sold to market. And as an example of making ecosystem-based fisheries management a reality, the California Dungeness Crab Fishing Gear Working Group was formed. This is a partnership across state and federal agencies, environmental, non-governmental organizations, and other partners to reduce whale and turtle entanglements while providing space for a vibrant crab fishery in California. And it's an example of how data-driven indicators can be delivered on a regular basis, tied to reference points that relate those indicators to the potential need for management action and rules that would follow from those reference points being crossed, so that it would be clear what the science-based guidelines are for preventing entanglements without causing undue harm to the fishery as ocean conditions change. Now, that idea that ocean conditions change is one that's a really difficult one to grapple with. And I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague Jaime Yankee to elaborate on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamil. And the last recommendation of the panel was that California should expand monitoring, increase accessibility, and timely application of the collected data to support ocean management and policy. Next slide, please. California has some of the most extensive and longest running monitoring programs in the world. These monitoring programs collect a wide array of physical and biological data, all the way from basic water properties up to the abundance and distribution of whales, or data collected in the open ocean, kelp beds, all the way out into the nearshore intertidal communities. All these programs track both natural and human influence changes in how these habitats are utilized and the impacts to coast and oceans. Next slide, please. In order to implement some of our recommendations, California needs a broad, sustainably funded, ecosystem scale approach to monitoring that accounts for the diversity and complexity of the coastal and ocean environments. These approaches require the collaboration of a variety of groups, including government agencies, academic institutions, nonprofit organizations, and community efforts to effectively assess a variety of human species, a variety of habitat, species, and human influences. Next slide, please. Monitoring should be expanded in space and time to accurately track changes in the ocean due to climate and human influences. And there are now new technologies that enable real-time monitoring and hold promise for development of more widespread concurrent monitoring platforms like the seldom shown in the photo. Next slide, please. Detailed and especially relevant information on human uses are lacking. It's like, I believe NOAA published about 10 years ago what we know as the Human Use Atlas, and it compiles a lot of information about what activities are being conducted and where, what resources are being harvested and how those activities co-occur in certain locations. But that document is now quite dated. We need to link human uses and values to management and conservation. And any new human uses should be grounded on the precautionary approach. Next slide, please. All data collected should be easily accessible and represent a broad perspective of ideas. Data should be translated into a user-friendly products, updated regularly, and applied to management and conservation decisions. And as was said before by Megan and others, the state should truly engage California tribes and tribal communities that historically have managed and monitored California coastal and ocean waters. And now back to Linda. Next slide, please.
Thank you. And just to quickly summarize the panel's key high-level messages, management that achieves healthy ocean and coastal ecosystems should be dynamic, comprehensive, and adaptable, informed by Indigenous traditional knowledge, grounded in regularly updated science and data, guided by a precautionary approach to decision-making, and driven by active engagement. I'd like to thank all the panelists for their time and their invaluable insights, and start the discussion with some follow-up clarifying questions on the presentations that we just heard. Next slide, please. Please add your questions, if you have some clarifying questions, to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And in the meantime, I will ask our panelists 1 or 2 questions to get us started. We have about 15 minutes for this, so hopefully we get to your question. So first, I'd like to direct a question to Jaime. The report calls for establishing enduring protections and durable stewardship that maintains the natural structure, function, and resilience of ecosystems. We heard about efforts to reduce entanglements while supporting the Dungeness crab fishery, and the report also described a past effort to protect imperiled salmon. Are there any examples that you could talk about of durable stewardship actions the state can take going forward to protect coastal ecosystems?
Yes, so I guess I will take the opportunity to talk about something close to my heart. One thing that is being done in other places, for example, Peru, where I come from, is like we conduct acoustic surveys of anchovy on an annual basis to establish quotas and determine how much can be harvested. It's not perfect, but here we could implement something like that. It's like the legislation that regulates anchovy fishery management has not been updated, and the harvest quotas that we use were established in 1995. That's way before all the recovery that we have seen on the seabirds and the marine mammals in the region. That will be a great improvement to management, will benefit wildlife, and will benefit a lot of fish species of commercial value.
Thanks. And did Jamil, I think you might have had a point to add to this with regard to examples of actions the state can take going forward.
Sure, thank you. One thing that we've been engaging in on the federal level with the Pacific Fisheries Management Council is the development of a fisheries ecosystem plan. Part of the point of having a fisheries ecosystem plan, in addition to individual fisheries management plans, is, as I mentioned during my presentation, to keep track of the whole as well as the parts. There's various ways to do this, but one durable action that could be taken is to develop indicators that in fact track the whole, because if you can't measure what's happening with the whole, you can't manage it either. At the federal level, there are several indicators that have risen to the forefront of doing this. One of those is just keeping track of the total landings across all fisheries, including anchovies that Jaime mentioned, but beyond that to include everything from tuna to salmon to groundfish and beyond. And to decide upon a reference point or a cap beyond which it would be considered excessive landings across all fisheries. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Now I see a question I'd like to direct to Megan with regard to land back and the land back movement with regard to lands back to Indigenous peoples. Perhaps you could talk a little bit more about that. And I had a follow-up question with regard to traditional knowledge systems.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's important for if we want to really have tribal management occur on the landscape and really apply Indigenous knowledge, then people need to have access to these places again. So as the Assistant Secretary kind of mentioned in her tribal acknowledgement, California has a long history of genocide and moving people, Indigenous people away from place. And so it's really important that if we want to restore these knowledge systems and apply these management practices that people have not just access in terms of use, but actual ownership and full authority over them. So I think that is a key part. If the state can take active actions, I should say, to return land, then those management practices can be reapplied. Similarly, I think through the development of co-management agreements in places that might be still state-owned land or within a tribe's ancestral territory, that sort of provides some sort of framework for that management to occur, even if the tribe doesn't own the land. I think that is also sort of a secondary approach to reapplying those knowledge systems.
Great, thank you. And then just a quick follow-up on some of the points that you raised. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship, the back and forth between traditional Indigenous knowledge systems and also the scientific, the types of Western scientific assessments that we heard both of these things today, and how do these play off each other? How do these interact? Tell us more.
Yeah, so I think the value, one of the values, I should say, of Indigenous traditional knowledge is it provides such a longer understanding of place, right? So you have people that have inhabited a particular place since time immemorial and have an understanding of what habitats and species, how they've changed over time. So I know, for example, under the baseline monitoring for the MPA, while that's valuable scientific data to collect and understand the effectiveness of MPAs, it also must sort of have a context, a much deeper, richer historical context that Indigenous traditional knowledge can provide. And I always really caution people from the concept of integrating these two knowledge systems because I don't really see integration being the right way of thinking about it. It's really, how do you build tribal capacity so that tribes can manage using traditional systems and more kind of scientific data collection efforts for their own management and collaboration with the state. So it's not to say that academics should come and gather traditional knowledge and use it, or the state should do that, but really the state has a responsibility and an opportunity really to provide the space for tribes to do that in collaboration.
Thank you. That was a really helpful clarification. Thank you. I have a question that's come in. I think that might be a good one for Jen. Someone is asking about estuarine tidal wetlands, providing an important base for coastal ecosystems, and noting that many such tidal wetlands will be impacted with sea level rise, and that we might need to protect adjacent upland areas so that wetlands can migrate inland. Do you have any thoughts on how the 30 by 30 initiative can look to protect and acquire and maintain such adjacent uplands?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's not really, it's really, really great and hits on some of the points that I made in my presentation. So our panel really recommended over and over the connections between ecosystems, even really different habitats, different adjacent ecosystems, and how much more bang for the buck you might get by looking towards conservation, protection, or stewardship of adjacent, what, have traditionally been sort of siloed habitats. And so I think that California is in a great place to think about how much more benefit you can get by thinking broadly. And this example that the questioner brought up is a great one. It's a perfect example, which is that tidal wetlands may eventually drown as sea level rises, and we might need to protect the upland areas in order to allow wetlands to persist. And I mentioned in my presentation just a simple example of, just adjacent terrestrial and coastal sorts of protected areas, but the commenter here has broadened that and made a really great example. So I do think our recommendation and some of the recommendations of the other panels have definitely been to think holistically about protection in what may have been previously siloed or disparate habitats.
Great, thank you. I just want to double check if any of the other panelists would like to comment on this particular one? Okay. So I have a question that's come in with regard to the economic model of fishing in the fishing industry. And they're asking if there's been thoughts or research into the economic model of the fishing industry in which coastal waters are regulated as a commodity owned and regulated by the government. Have you any thoughts with regard to economic models as it pertains to fisheries and how that can interplay with the 30 by 30 initiative? If folks want to think about that one a little more, we can take some other questions. And just so folks know, we may not get to all the questions. We have just another couple of minutes to address some of these, but we have the opportunity to potentially answer some afterwards. So we will certainly try to address some of these.
I mean, I will just take it for a second. I'm not totally sure that I understand the question, in that our coastal waters are actually fairly highly regulated now and managed by various institutions, various agencies, fisheries management agencies, and so forth. And so maybe the question is more about thinking about it as a commodity or a I can't say the word. Can somebody help me here? Commodifization of the fishery. So I'm not sure. Maybe Anna could reframe the question in the Q&A for us, so that maybe
yeah, but maybe
put on better.
Yeah,
if not now, then in the future at least. Yeah, Linda.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's always the opportunity to raise these issues, as was mentioned earlier, in the written comments too, in case we don't get to those today. One other question that I'd like to touch on that someone raised, we didn't talk too much about water quality issues, pollution, stormwater runoff, sewage releases, impacting nearshore ecosystems and in inland areas and estuaries that are important to anadromous species as well. Would one of the panelists like to talk a little bit, perhaps Jen, since of because of your work on nearshore ecosystems, or somebody else like to talk about things that we should be thinking about in the 30 by 30 initiative, and enhanced regulatory or perhaps different regulatory options that we might want to take to address these issues, or perhaps monitoring?
Linda, you may yourself may be better able to take on the water quality issues. That's a little bit outside of my area once we start touching down into regulatory frameworks and so forth. I do know that water quality obviously is super important for nearshore marine ecosystems, kelp forests, and such forth. And there are myriad regulations in place right now. So as I commented earlier in my remarks, I think it's going to be very important for the state to evaluate and for the agencies to evaluate any regulations where they touch down on the potential for impacting biodiversity. And as we just spoke about, it's a tricky situation because to some extent, managing particular habitats, it can be siloed into particular agencies. And so this may result in really having to look across regulatory frameworks and across habitats. So where do regulations in one habitat actually affect another habitat that might be managed by a different agency or by a different group?
Yeah, and that actually gets to the work of and the intent of the Ocean Protection Council to do that very thing, to think across agencies, and also the emphasis in the report that you all prepared on the land-sea interface, and Jamil's point as well about ecosystem-based management, thinking about how our coasts and blue water ecosystems and inland ecosystems work as a system. And pollution is just one element of it, but it impacts across the whole system. So it's useful to have the OPC as a model to be able to move forward with some of these initiatives and thinking about things a little bit more deeply. I did get a final question that I think is a good one to close on. The person writes that there are hundreds of thousands of biodiversity observations collected by Californians along the coast, including volunteer water quality monitoring programs, Beach Watch, MPA Watch, a lot of opportunities where the public, who we're going to be hearing from more in a minute, is taking part of and adding to the value of the work that we all are doing. The programs are real ways to actively engage Californians to gather meaningful data at scale. What do you all see, just an open question, as the role of these types of community collected data and community science efforts in informing management and planning for areas to conserve, or monitoring of these areas and management of these areas going forward?
I'll chime in briefly so that Jaime or others have a chance, but I'd say I agree with this questioner. It's literally the wave of the future. Using citizen science and crowdsourced data from people who are on the water and on our coasts, seeing what's happening, provides us with an early warning system and set team of first responders that can't possibly be scaled through government resources alone. So I really think that figuring out how to network that information so that it's readily accessible to decision makers is the challenge, but having these kinds of data streams is critical.
I think Jamil provided a real great answer. There are several examples of citizen science data being used for management right now. I think the person that asked the question mentioned Beach Watch. That's one of them. And then you have the well alert data, which is incorporated into the well safe program in Southern California right now. And those provide early warnings to some of the human climate related impacts.
And I'd just like to follow up as well. I agree with the previous panelists. The comment is a fantastic one. California is so rich in citizen science observations. And I'd just like to emphasize a point Jamil made, which is we have been fantastic at collecting data. The data have been used in a limited way for many groups for management, but I think a real area that the state, that everyone could work on is what Jamil said. It's strengthening the pathways of getting those data into formats and into locations and into products and outputs for use by management. And I just think that's going to take everybody's efforts.
Yeah, all great points. Megan, did you want to add?
I'll just add, I echo that. I think as long as there's a strong sort of framework, right, and how that data is being collected, really grassroots data collection, I think bringing it back up is extremely valuable, particularly areas where I live on the North Coast. That's, very far from a lot of the research institutions sort of doing some of this work. So people on the ground that know the places, feel connected to the places and really have a vested interest, I think can contribute greatly to our scientific understanding as we move forward.
Thank you. Thanks to the public for your great questions, and thanks to the expert panelists for all your insights and recommendations. And I'd like to now turn it over back to CNRA.
Thanks so much, Linda, and all the panel members for your really insightful dialogue. And thanks to the members of the public for your really thoughtful questions. We're about to take a 5-minute break before we begin public input. If I could get on the screen the PowerPoint with the questions that the panelists and the public participants are asked to address. So these are some of the questions we'd like to consider when you give public input. And when we come back for public input, we will take people in alphabetical order by last name. So please feel free to get up, stretch your legs, do whatever you need to do, and we'll come back for public input in 5 minutes, which is 4:08. So we'll see you in 5 minutes at 4:08. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. So we are getting ready to begin the public input portion of the workshop. My co-facilitator, Ivana, and I will take turns managing this portion of the meeting. The advisory panel's insights and the input that we receive from you tonight and via other communications will be used in the development of the Pathways to 30 by 30 document. When you registered for the workshop, you were asked to indicate whether you wanted to provide a 30-second comment by pre-registering. If you pre-registered, we'll give you the opportunity to speak first, and we'll stay at least until all pre-registered commenters have spoken. If time allows, we'll provide an opportunity for others to provide comment. If there isn't time for you to comment, you can submit your comments via email or voicemail. As indicated on the screen here. We'll start by taking pre-registered speakers in small groups in alphabetical order by last name. We ask that you don't give or receive time from other participants. You'll have a 90-second visual timer on the screen to indicate how much time you have left. We'll show 5 speakers on each slide. When you see or hear your name, we'll ask you to click the raise hand button or press *9 if you're on the phone. You'll see a box. If you're on your computer, you'll see a box with instructions that will ask you to unmute. So we'll have you unmute yourself. And if you're on the phone, you'll get a verbal cue that will ask you to press *6 to unmute yourself. To accommodate Spanish-speaking commenters, we're allowing 3 minutes to account for interpretation needs. So if you're providing your input in Spanish, please announce that when you're unmuted so that the interpreter can prepare. So in order to accommodate participants who are not English speakers, we would ask that everyone speak clearly at a reasonable pace, balancing that with the time that you have to speak. So also we ask that you rename yourself on Zoom to match the name that you registered with, so we'll know who you are. We thank you in advance for your patience as we navigate technology-related delays, and also please forgive us if we mispronounce your name. So we will now start with our first set of 5 speakers. So if I could have the next slide, please. Great. So our first speakers are John Armstrong, Sherilyn Ashmead, Sandy Aylesworth, Jennifer Bauer, and Matt Bond. So if you see or hear your name, please raise your hand and we will invite you to speak. Again, John Armstrong, Sherilyn Ashmead, Sandy Aylesworth, Jennifer Bauer, and Matt Bond. I see Sandy Aylesworth. Sandy, please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Sandy Aylesworth, and I'm a senior advocate with the Natural Resources Defense Council's Oceans Program. I wanted to first thank the advisory panel for their comprehensive paper and CNRA for this opportunity to comment. Climate change is exerting an oversized influence on California's marine and coastal ecosystems. Combined with the impacts of local stressors like pollution, fishing, and industrial ocean uses, California's ocean biodiversity is under threat. As heavily impacted as the California seascape is now, the pressures to use the ocean more intensively are only expected to increase. To guide the state's 30 by 30 effort, it should adopt a clear science-based definition of conserve that will help achieve the stated goals of the executive order and allow the state to gauge progress over time. The definition should include the following 3 elements. 1, conservation measures are durable over time. 2, levels of protection are adequate to support biodiversity, climate resilience, and/or climate mitigation. And 3, the natural structure and functions of the ecosystem are maintained or restored for generations to come. As the state implements 30 by 30, it should also consider how to make the MPA network even more effective and consider protecting other marine areas that could confer biodiversity benefits. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Our next speaker is Jennifer Bauer. Jennifer, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh no, I just lost my comments. I'm sorry. Can you come back to me in just a minute?
Sure, no problem.
Sorry.
So next we'll take Matt Bond. Matt, please unmute yourself.
Unmuted. Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Matt Bond. I am a freedive spear fisherman and a veteran of the MLPA process, and was very pleased to hear Megan recognize the lessons she learned there. My concern with this process is I do not see any sort of recreational fishing representation on this panel whatsoever. It's nice to have someone from NOAA and looking at the federal fisheries management, but two of the most important, in my mind, drivers of this decree were access and also food and economic sustainability. I have not heard the panel address those at all. You spoke about a precautionary approach. The precautionary approach can be dangerous, again, when we're talking about preserving access and we're talking about preserving the economics and viability of utilizing the resource. It was funny to hear Mark Gold talk about a UC theme. UCSB gerrymandered the MLPA process completely to build a giant marine reserve around the campus. I was personally present in backroom deals. You guys need way more transparency in this, and you need to make sure that consumptive users are heard. Backcountry Hunters is who's going to represent me. So you asked for organizations. That's the organization, Backcountry Hunters. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we're going to go back to Jennifer Bauer. Jennifer?
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me a minute. Thank you everyone on the panel and everyone for all the work you're doing on this. So I'm a member of the Santa Lucia chapter of the Sierra Club on the Central Coast of California. Here on the Central Coast, we live on the ancestral land of the Chumash people who have been dedicated stewards of the land and oceans for centuries. To achieve the 30 by 30 ocean conservation goals, we believe it's important to collaborate and partner with California Native tribes through the recognition of traditional ecological knowledge and expansion of co-management, especially coastal tributaries, as well as recognizing the rights of tribal nations to use the coast and offshore islands in the traditional ways the tribes have used for centuries. Inclusiveness is the key to this goal. Efforts need to be made to ensure that Indigenous people serve on all conservation commissions, committees, and work groups, and hold regular stakeholder meetings with Native American groups and organizations. To protect our oceans and rivers in partnership with California Native tribes, we encourage the panel to support the designation of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary proposed for the Central Coast. National marine sanctuaries provide permanent bans against offshore oil exploration and drilling, prohibit ocean mining, prohibit discharges into sanctuary waters, and provide platforms for long-term ocean research. In addition, we request designation in Northern California of the Smith River and Klamath River estuaries as national estuarine research reserves. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. So one more time, I'll call John Armstrong or Sherilyn Ashmead. Okay, so let's move to our next set of speakers, please. Next, we have Sean Bothwell, Bruce Campbell, Alan Carlton, Sandra Cattell, Oscar Cisco. So again, Sean Bothwell, Bruce Campbell, Alan Carlton, Sandra Cattell, Oscar Cisco. So I see Sean Bothwell. Sean, please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sean Bothwell, Executive Director for California Coastkeeper Alliance. I'm going to skip the pleasantries and just get straight to it. I want to start with policy recommendation 5 in the report, implementing sustainable policies. I really appreciate and agree with the report, highlighting the need to better implement policies, enforce the policies that we have, specifically the reference to the ASBS policy being implemented within the Caltrans stormwater permit. This is just one example of numerous stormwater permits that need to implement the ASBS policy. To date, it's been just completely broken. There's been no effort to come into compliance with that policy. So in addition to the Caltrans stormwater permit, state and regional boards also need to implement the ASBS exception on phase 1, phase 2 municipal stormwater permits. My second addition to the report, and this really could fit into any of the 5 recommendations, but is a tool to achieve the 30 by 30 in coastal waters, is for the state to create new water quality protections for MPAs. Currently, only 45 of the 124 MPAs have at least some overlap with an ASBS, but all MPAs would benefit from water quality protections. In 2020, the state adopted its Ocean Strategic Plan through the Ocean Protection Council. And with the strategic plan, the state commits to strengthen water quality protection in MPAs equivalent to at least the areas of ASBSs or water quality protected areas by 2023. To date, there's been no progress towards achieving that goal, but California Coastkeeper Alliance is actually in talks with the water boards on moving that forward. And so I would recommend that be something that this panel looks at moving forward with 30 by 30. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Alan Carlton. Alan, please unmute yourself.
My name is Alan Carlton from the Sierra Club. I think this whole 30 by 30 campaign is great, and I think you're proceeding in a good direction. I look forward to when we can identify some places that we can actually start working on protecting. But I think the one thing that's really lacking is funding. It's fine to say we need to protect land, but you can't protect, especially private land, without money to acquire it. And I think what we really need in the next budget next year is a line item for funding for acquisition for 30 by 30. An example of a place where there's land on the San Francisco Bay Shore that could be acquired and provide additional protection and access for people is Point Melati in Richmond. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Sandra Cattell. Go ahead, Sandra.
Thank you. Sandra Cattell, also with the Sierra Club Angeles chapter. In addition to the threats to coastal and marine biodiversity that you spoke about, like climate change and loss of shoreline habitat to development, we would like to also highlight things like ocean litter and pollution, including the untreated sewage discharge that we've experienced from the Hyperion sanitation plant. Locally, we have port issues, including water and sound pollution, and the shipping lanes are disruptive to the migration routes of many species. Healthy oceans could be achieved by developing state and federal legislation to protect oceans and beaches. Examples are, please continue to support the designation of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary and the request for designation of the Smith River and the Klamath River estuaries as national estuarine research reserves. Marine protected areas have successfully increased threatened fish stocks and should be expanded. We should strive for an abundance of species and populations and not just adequate supplies. We should continue to protect our land-sea interface, like wetlands such as Bayona in LA County and Boca Chica in Orange County and their watersheds. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. It looks like we have a phone caller. The last 4 digits of the number are 7056. So I will I'll allow you to talk, and please let me know who your name, if you are one of these speakers on the list. Go ahead, please.
This is Bruce Campbell, and Some major toxic related issues related to coastal waters of California I see include in Humboldt Bay, there's a historic legacy of PCB, dioxin, and radioactive contamination, and it's still being hit hard by clear cutting and herbicide spraying in its watersheds, which empty into Humboldt Bay. The Farallon Islands have enough problems with radioactive waste barrels without dropping anticoagulants by helicopter on the islands. San Francisco Bay and Delta has enough toxic problems without trying to deny the basic flow of sufficient fresh water into the San Francisco Bay, which disrupts the food chain in this largest estuarine delta on the west coast of the Americas. There was mass dumping of barrels of DDT and other industrial waste in the San Pedro Channel Pacific Ocean between Palos Verdes and Catalina Island. If some of these barrels are within 3 miles of the California coast or within 3 miles of Catalina Island, then the state must get involved with this massive cleanup and disposal effort. And be sure to care for the marine feeding area of the marbled murrelet, as well as its prey species from the Oregon border to Big Sur, including an evaluation of wind energy projects, ocean outfall pipes, shifting lanes, possible drilling, etc. And lastly, I also support the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary Protection legislation, which pertains to long-time tribal lands under ocean waters beyond the Point Concepcion and Point Arguello areas, and that should be enacted. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. One more time, I'll read Oscar Cisco as the last name on this slide. Okay, let's move on to our next set of speakers, please. We have Moises Cisneros, Mike Conroy, Brandon Contreras, Chance Cutrano, and Cindy Dawson. Moises Cisneros, Mike Conroy, Brandon Contreras, Chance Cutrano, and Cindy Dawson. Moises Cisneros, please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Moises Cisneros with the Sierra Club. Many thanks to the panel. I'd like to uplift what they've already asserted, that it's critical to recognize the traditional ecological knowledge of tribal nations, whether it meshes with Western science or not, and consider land-back movements and co-management of the coasts and offshore islands in ways that support sustainability. We also must recognize that often that there is a lack of capacity, both financially and at the both communications level for tribes to participate. And as such, the 30 by 30 process must adapt to accommodate their participation. Lastly, I'd like to voice my support for the designation of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary, the Central Coast, and request the designation for the Smith River and Klamath River estuaries as National Estuarine Research Reserves. Thank you much.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Mike Conroy. Whoops, hold on a second. I unmuted the wrong person. Go ahead, Mike.
Confirming you can hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. My name is Mike Conroy. I'm from the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations. While the public has been told that additional MPAs were not contemplated to result from this process, the summary document really seems to be pointing in that direction. We thank the panel for their work in producing the document. We would like to note the lack of fishing industry and fisheries management expertise on the panel. Fisheries off California are world-renowned for adaptive management approaches that take into account ecosystem needs and functions. To the extent the summary document implies otherwise, we wholeheartedly disagree. We very much appreciate the panel's commitment to incorporation of Indigenous traditional knowledge and tribal involvement in the management decision-making process. I would hope that fishermen's traditional knowledge and inputs would be considered as well. Since the late 1800s, we are on the water every day. We are the first to see and experience changes in the ocean, and we are continually adjusting our fishing practices to adapt to dynamic ocean conditions. We are the only access many Californians have to the living marine resources in state coastal waters. On the evening of October 6th of last year, myself and other fishing industry stakeholders were informed that the executive order was going to be signed the next day. each of us was assured we would have a role in the California Biodiversity Collaborative established under the executive order. To date, neither myself nor any industry reps who were promised a seat at that table has even seen the table. We invite the CNRA to engage with the fishing industry as this topic moves forward, as it is challenging to address all of our concerns in 90 seconds.
Thanks for your comment. Next, we have Chance Cotrano.
Thank you. My name is Chance Cotrano, and I'm with the Resource Renewal Institute. I'd like to address question 1 and the other question on monitoring gaps. I think one of the biggest threats to coastal marine biodiversity over the next 10 years here in California is the challenge of squaring the state's mandate to preserve coastal agriculture and the need to protect coastal resources to the maximum extent practicable. As we're currently seeing in California, coastal agriculture, particularly coastal beef and dairy ranching, can greatly contribute to risks of ecological drought and water deficit, changing water quality conditions, salinity, quantity and quality of freshwater inputs, water levels, soil conditions, vegetation stress, and species composition within and around California's coastal zone. For example, the recent mass die-offs of Tule elk at Point Reyes National Seashore are easily trackable and highly visible impacts of ecological water deficit due to coastal cattle operations, but these aren't the only impacts. And without more data on groundwater availability or projections for best and worst case climate futures, it's increasingly difficult for the public, government agencies, or interested stakeholders to understand changes in water balance as new management plans are proposed. And there's no way to surmise the implications for water futures of surface water, groundwater flows, and the processes that stem from that to protect coastal and marine biodiversity. Thank you for the time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I will read the other names on this slide one more time. Brandon Contreras and Cindy Dawson. Okay, let's move on to our next set of speakers, please. We have Jerry Desmond, Jamie Diamond, Nancy Eek, Ariane Eroy, and Arthur Feinstein. Jerry Desmond, Jamie or Jaime Diamond, Nancy Eek, Ariane Eroy, and Arthur Feinstein. All right, I see we have Arthur Feinstein. Arthur, please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Hi, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk. Our estuarine habitats along California coast, and there are 3 national estuarine programs, San Francisco Bay, Morro Bay, and San Diego Bay. Their shallow water habitats provide some of the most critical habitats and food bases for our ocean ecosystems. And they're all threatened by sea level rise because tidal marshes and tidal flats are providing some of those essential habitats and are going to drown as sea level rises. And so we do need to look at how we can keep our tidal marshes in existence, or we will completely alter our ocean habitat, ocean ecosystem. And that means allowing tidal marshes to migrate uplands in appropriate places where there's that opportunity. And that is often going to require acquisition. So aside from regulations and protection, which is wonderfully emphasized in number 5, acquisition is critical if we're going to see the future have tidal marshes the way we have now. And so I really urge this 30 by 30 program to start thinking about acquisition. Oh, and I'm with the Sierra Club, as have many others. Nice to hear so many friends. So again, emphasizing acquisition as one of the tools is critical. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your comment. I'll read the names on this slide one more time. Jerry Desmond, Jamie Diamond, Nancy Eek, and Ariane Eroy. It looks like we have Ariane. Ariane, go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Thank you for taking my comments. This is Ariane Eroy. I want to discuss the very term of biodiversity, which is confounding and largely misused. by both members of the panel and sometimes the public when native species and life forms are confounded with other species in residence, and the species in residence are considered unwanted, destructive, or even dangerous. By denigrating diverse species as invasive, nativists employ the same intolerant, if not bigoted, terminology that has been used against Native peoples, African Americans, and immigrants since this nation's founding. Nativists and the chemical industry do not merely promote rodenticide, herbicide, and pesticide usage, but also relentlessly demonize certain species as a means to promote certain products and projects. This occurs not merely in rural areas, but also in cities and along the coast, as nativists partner directly with those who hold special interests and who aim to degrade, privatize, or develop public lands. Over the past decades, Americans have been encouraged to fear or even hate certain species. We humans are the true invasive species. I urge us not to poison the Farallones or any ocean habitat. We need every human being and every species and understand their importance in the right place. Let's work with love and come from a place of love, I beg of you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, oh, it looked like we had Jamie Diamond and now we don't. So let me read these names one more time. Jerry Desmond, Jamie Diamond, Nancy Eek. All right, Jamie, if you come back, we'll give you another chance. But for now, we'll move to our next set of speakers. We have Megan Flaherty, Brenda Gallegos, Carla Garibay, Kate Gaston, and Ryan Gentry. Megan Flaherty, Brenda Gallegos, Carla Garibay, Kate Gaston, and Ryan Gentry. I see Brenda Gallegos. Go ahead, unmute yourself and provide your comment, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. Hi everyone, Brenda Gallegos. I am with Hispanic Access Foundation. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. A definition of healthy oceans must recognize that the oceans are composed of overlapping and dynamic ecosystems whose environmental services sustain all life on the planet. Therefore, a holistic and inclusive definition of healthy oceans should include, but is not limited to, species health and diversity, health of interdependent systems, resilience, and by sustainable relationships with human activity. A healthy oceans policy will not only just benefit the state's 30 by 30 goals for coastal waters, but a science-based healthy oceans policy that is protective of marine resources will also help preserve and restore inland lands, waters, and biodiversity. With that being said, our community should also be included in this coastal waters biodiversity. 23% of the US coastal residents are Latino, and 6% of coastal residents live in primarily Spanish-speaking households. Systematic environmental racism have caused poverty, economic instability, health challenges, and reduced access to social and political resources among many Latinos. This lack of resources puts coastal Latinos into an elevated coastal hazard risk category with increased vulnerability to the consequences of climate change. The ongoing loss of estuary and wetlands contributes to Latinos' increased susceptibility to coastal hazards, including sea level rise and storms. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Carla Garibay. Go ahead, Carla.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. This is Carla Garibay on behalf of Azul, an environmental justice and marine conservation organization. We really appreciate the panelists' comments related to the need for science-based policies and respectful partnership with tribes and local communities. Azul believes that California's Healthy oceans definition should acknowledge humans' complex relationship with and as part of nature. Ocean health is context dependent and may vary over time, but that natural change should not be used to rationalize destructive human practices. From our perspective, human interactions can be a sustainable element of our marine systems so long as policy efforts focus on preventing the overexploitation, pollution, and stress of our marine resources. We believe that a healthy ocean definition that prioritizes holistic biodiversity and ocean conservation beyond just the protection of commercially and recreationally important species is key for achieving 30/30 and ecosystem resilience. Healthy ocean policies across all California agencies should not just protect biodiversity for the benefit of humans, but actually protect coastal water ecosystems' own needs and resources now and into the future as climate and other conditions change. Finally, we urge that extractive activities and economics don't just trump biodiversity protection, restoration efforts, BIPOC and EJ community expertise, needs, and cultural practices, or equitable public access. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll read the rest of the names on the slide again. Megan Flaherty, Kate Gaston, and Ryan Gentry. Oh, we have Jamie Diamond from the previous slide. So Jamie, go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment, please.
Apologies for being late. I just had to evacuate from an area near Tahoe due to a fire.
Oh no.
A few things I'd like to address. So I apologize if this was already covered, but unfortunately I wasn't able to listen to the previous part. I'd like to see what we're going to do to address the DDT issue that is leaching out by Catalina in drums, tens of thousands of gallons of it. Also, wind farms that are being proposed off of Avila, and I believe one off Northern California, Vandenberg, as well as one off Northern California. Are those areas going to count in the 30 by 30? Since essentially they will in fact be closed off. We won't be able to fish around or near them because of the risk of damage to vessels or the mills themselves, the turbines themselves. And then I'd also like to know what practical things are going to be done to deal with sewer and storm runoff pollution, things that definitely can be fixed and addressed, but haven't been. For example, the down San Diego River, there was also just a big leak sewage spill in, I believe it was the LA area. I apologize, I'm a little scattered, like I said, but there's been some large scale sewage spills recently. And I don't think really at this point, at this stage, there's really no reason for that. That in of itself does more harm than anything else. So when we're looking at 30 by 30 and coastal fisheries, we really need to be looking at the pre-existing things that contribute to pollution, but also are going to be added closures already to be counted towards our credit.
Thank you for your comment, Jamie, and hope you stay safe, and really appreciate you making your comment in spite of what you're going through, but stay safe. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to our next set of speakers, please. We have Lisa Gilfillan, Natalie Glasgow, Daniel Glusenkamp, Lisa Gover, and Lexi Grittelfeld. Lisa Gilfillan, Natalie Glasgow, Daniel Glusenkamp, Lisa Gover, Leslie Grittelfeld. So I see Natalie Glasgow. Go ahead and provide your comment, please, Natalie.
Good afternoon. My name is Natalie Glasgow, and I'm a resident of Bakersfield, California, and an incoming third-year student at the University of California, Riverside. I would firstly like to voice my support for the 30 by 30 movement and applaud the work being done here to protect our coastal waters. I also want to bring attention to marine protected areas, or MPAs. These have proven to be successful in protecting and increasing marine biodiversity. California is already a leader in the effort to protect ocean species and coastal ecosystems, and the effectiveness of MPAs in this work speaks for itself. It is vital that we as a state continue to expand this program and further our leadership in the protection of our waters. However, climate change is perhaps the most impending threat to oceanic biodiversity. MPAs do little in combating or protecting against some of the worst marine effects of climate change, such as rising sea temperatures, rising sea levels, and ocean acidification. Therefore, we must put in more effort to protect the particular ecosystems and species that could actually help in the fight against climate change. Through carbon sequestration, kelp forests can massively intake carbon dioxide and aid in decreasing the excessive emissions that lead to global warming. We also must consider the interconnection of species. If we want kelp to intake carbon, we must protect the otters because otter populations impact kelp growth. In the consideration of this interconnection and the protection of these and other vital species, we may be able to fight back against the worst effects of climate change. Thank you all for your time.
Thanks for your comment. Next we have, oh, I just saw Lisa go over and then she disappeared. So Lisa, if you, there you go. Go ahead, unmute yourself, please, Lisa.
Hi, thank you. This is Lisa Gover. I just want to thank you for hosting yet another session like this and congratulate you on the start for the 30/30 conservation effort. Congratulate the governor as well too. I appreciate the acknowledgement that all of California is native lands. All the resources at one time were belonged to the natives. My comment is this, and I've been listening to, and I haven't heard yet, all that. That doesn't mean you haven't said it, and maybe even several times, but I'm hoping that this 30/30 effort is merely a start, that we just want to make some plans for 30% right now, and that we would do more in the future. Thank you for allowing me to share my thought about that.
Thank you for your comment. Let's see, I'll read the remaining names on the slide one more time. Lisa Gilfillan, Daniel Glusenkamp, Lexi Grittelfeld. Okay, let's move on to our next set of speakers, please. We have Tom Hafer, Marcia Hanscom, Benjamin Harris, Pamela Hetherington, and Pedro Hernandez. Tom Hafer, Marcia Hanscom, Benjamin Harris, Pamela Hetherington, Pedro Hernandez. Okay, I see Marcia Hanscom. Marcia, please unmute yourself and talk.
Hello, my name is Marcia Hanscom. I'm with the Sierra Club. I'm the Bio and Wetlands Chair, and I'm on the executive committee of the Angeles chapter of the club. I'm speaking to you from Shoshone Gabrielino Tongva lands on the Los Angeles coast. And I want to urge the Natural Resources Agency to use the most up-to-date science for conservation of our coastal waters, including wetlands, estuaries, and other sometimes wetlands that are the adjacent terrestrial areas that Jen Cassell spoke about earlier. The reason I want to highlight this is in the last decade, newly published science reports have concluded that something is opposite of what a lot of us thought for a very long time. And what was that? We all thought that our coastal wetlands were supposed to all be inundated with tidal waters twice each day, like San Francisco Bay. But it turns out, once they saw the historical documents that were long hidden, uncovered from NOAA, we read that the newly discovered science, we learned that the coastal estuaries, almost all of them on the California coast, were historically primarily closed systems, what scientists call bar-built estuaries. Of course, this made perfect sense to the wildlife biologists, and we want to make sure that that is taken into consideration here, that we're not using old science to conserve our areas. We need to look at the most up-to-date science. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Benjamin Harris. Benjamin, please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Benjamin Harris, and I am the staff attorney at Los Angeles Waterkeeper. We fully support California's 30 by 30 goal for coastal waters, and we appreciate the progress made via the state's marine protected areas. Over the course of human history, we have treated oceans as primarily a dumping ground for sewage, polluted stormwater, and trash. This behavior cannot continue if we intend to meaningfully conserve ocean ecosystems, which is imperative to combat the climate crisis. To that end, it is vital that we recognize nature's right to exist free of human interference and to develop policy that ensures ecosystems have a voice. As noted in the panel's report, a new rights-based approach would create durable and enforceable rights for our oceans to exist in a healthy state, not only preventing further environmental degradation, but also establishing a basis to protect them for generations to come. Our current regulatory framework simply does not provide this opportunity. Furthermore, as several panelists have acknowledged, we cannot achieve the 30 by 30 goal for coastal waters without also protecting the ecological health of inland water bodies that connect to the ocean. Here in Los Angeles, the poor water quality in our rivers and streams, such as the mostly concretized Los Angeles River, causes pervasive public health impacts and prevents meaningful restoration opportunities. Moving to a rights-based approach, both for California's coastal waters and the inland waterways that flow into them, would guarantee the state's conservation efforts are effective, long-lasting, and practical. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Pamela Hetherington. Go ahead, Pamela.
Thank you, and thank you once again for bringing us all together around 30 by 30. And please excuse my rescue birds. They get excited when they hear people talking. Wetlands must be a priority. MPA's work, sanctuaries work. Please keep your eyes on these prizes going forward. We need to assess current onshore and offshore pollutants to be able to withstand sea level rise and other climate challenges. The Environmental Center is engaged in a coastal access trail to the Matalahul State Marine Reserve in La Jolla, San Diego. Having tribal input is key to a successful project, but having connections to tribal input can be challenging. We're fortunate to have the Climate Science Alliance and our MPA collaborative to help us find the right path. They are an excellent resource. We encourage you to cast a wide net in your collaborations. As we're all learning, when we think we throw things away, there is really no away. It's either land or ocean that is the receptive of our trash. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. Left on this slide is Tom Hafer and Pedro Hernandez. Okay, let's go to our next set of speakers, please. We have Carolyn Higgins, Karen High, Volker Honey, Vicki Hoover, Rick Johnson. Carolyn Higgins, Karen High, Volker Honey, Vicki Hoover, and Rick Johnson. So Karen High, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Karen High with the Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge. And I just want to say I really appreciate the comments of the panel, especially regarding the issue of building protection across the land-sea interface. And my question is, how will this be done? It's a situation that's urgent. It's of paramount importance that funding for acquisition, restoration, and management be provided. And I'm going to use San Francisco Bay because that's what I know. In the Bay Area, our system supports over 70% of California's coastal wetlands, and the long-term sustainability of these vitally important habitats is of grave concern as sea levels rise. Our coastal wetlands are threatened by diminishing sediment supplies and our history of developing right up to the edges of their landward side. Undeveloped areas that could serve as migratory pathways fall through a governance gap and are not protected from the threat of development. And this is ongoing. We need to act now. It's an urgent situation. We need to act now to conserve migratory pathways for tidal wetlands, or we risk losing the tidal wetlands forever to coastal squeeze, and we lose the opportunities to protect their pathways. So we desperately need funding and other mechanisms to permanently protect wetland migration pathways. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Volker Hone. Go ahead, Volker.
Mute. Unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for holding these 30-30 sessions. There's been a lot of them. It's been very informative. It's an evolutionary process. And I'm Volker Hohen. I represent the Watermen's Alliance, a statewide recreational and subsistence spearfishing group. And we're asked that during this 30-30 process, that there's one organization that's held accountable ethically and legally for the behavior and the methodology. Also, we ask that the current MPA network not be expanded because we are still very much in the early stages of implementing it. We have successfully banned recreational fishing for most of it, but the vast majority of other recreational takes, such as non-living organisms, has some opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Vicki Hoover. Excuse me. Go ahead, Vicki.
Hello. Yes, I'm Vicki Hoover, and I'm with Sierra Club's 30 by 30 task force. Thank you for all your work on 30 by 30. I would like to urge the CNRA not to keep deferring the consideration of additional marine protected areas until some undefined future time when a review is complete. We can really use more MPAs right now. In spite of some assertions from the fishing industry, MPAs do actually increase the stock of fish and other sea life. They also increase the variety and diversity of species along the coast and along the coastal waters. And however, in addition to designation of more MPAs, it's also important to consider how those we have are managed. And that includes monitoring to see if the regulations governing them are effective, and enforcement to ensure that they are enforced. I'm not sure exactly how much of that is done, and I know we need more. Also, onshore activities are important. A lot of our coast is managed federally by the Bureau of Land Management as the California Coastal National Monument, and I hope the CNRA is working closely with the BLM on taking care of those coastal areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Rick Johnson. Go ahead, Rick.
Thank you. I'm also with the Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge and urge attention and action related to San Francisco Bay ecosystems. The refuges that we have in the Bay are very important. Ecologically, they're also equitably available for fishermen, for hunting. There's a broad base of support for preserving them. In particular, we need funds to complete the Don Edwards National Wildlife Refuge. There's acreage that's they're authorized to acquire. They need the funds to do that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. So the last name on this slide that we've not heard from is Carolyn Higgins. Okay, let's move on to our next set of speakers, please. We have Andy Johnson, Sri Kandadai, Angela Kemsley, Wayne Cotto, Susan Kirks. So Andy Johnson, Sri Kandadai, Angela Kemsley, Wayne Cotto, and Susan Kirks. Andy Johnson, please go ahead and provide your comment.
Thank you. My name is Andy Johnson, and I represent Defenders of Wildlife's California program. To achieve 30 by 30 objectives for California's coastal waters, California has to take every opportunity to protect at-risk species and habitats, such as kelp forests, estuaries, and other coastal wetlands and watersheds. With sea level rise, these systems need to migrate and establish themselves to continue providing ecological services that benefit the people of California. Any sound science-based definition of ocean conservation that protects biodiversity has to start with an ethic of responsible use and consumption. The verb exploit has two definitions. One focuses on the productive use of a resource. The other focuses on the base and unfair use of resources for one's own advantage. In so many cases, productive use has little to do with consideration of ecological impacts. Our management of coastal and ocean resources accommodate too much damage to ecological functions and wildlife. When we establish a new coastal park, our first thought should not be to accommodate every conceivable recreational use. When we acknowledge the ecological value of a place like Guadalupe Napomo Dunes, we shouldn't allow off-road vehicles to drive over them. State agencies have to pay more than lip service to climate resilience, biodiversity, protection of coastal waters, and socioeconomic equity. We have to employ nature-based solutions to protect these systems. The state should support more MPAs as well as federal designations such as the Chumash National Marine Sanctuary and new National Estuarine Research Reserves. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Sri Kandadai. Go ahead, Sri.
Thank you. I'm Sri Kandadai, a rising high school junior, and I have been volunteering with the San Diego Audubon since I was 8. An avid bird watcher, I've often visited San Diego's lagoons, including some that support eelgrass. I'm thrilled to hear of the Ocean Protection Council's goal to support 15,000 acres of seagrass beds and to create an additional 1,000 acres by 2025. Eelgrass provides a variety of ecosystem services, such as storing blue carbon and reducing ocean acidification. It even contributes to our biodiversity by being a nursery to a lot of marine life. However, alongside dredging and recreational motorboat activity, one of the most imminent threats to seagrass beds is sea level rise. As seagrass requires shallow water to photosynthesize, sea level rise will force beds to move up toward the coast where they can be blocked by barriers and coastal development. Considering this, we request relevant organizations to fund efforts to research sea level rise impacts and plan for necessary mitigation, including limiting coastal development where possible. A recent report by the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission has recommended standardizing methods of eelgrass restoration and monitoring. This would help compare different restoration projects and would allow the scientific community to better understand next steps. Thank you for all of your work in protecting our waters.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Angela Kemsley.
Hey, Debbie, can I just jump in here?
Yes.
I just want to put in a plug, and this is general. Can people just slow down a little bit? We have people that are getting translation, and I want to make sure all folks can hear all the great comments. So thanks.
Thanks for that important reminder, Jen. Angela, go ahead and provide your comment, please.
Hi, this is Angela Kemsley from Wild Coast. I am speaking to you from the land of the Kumeyaay people, and I would like to acknowledge that they have been the original stewards of our coast and ocean for time immemorial, and echo what many people have said, that our Indigenous communities are incredibly important to include in every step of this process, and to recognize the traditional ecological knowledge and make sure that we include them at every step, and take into account the capacity and especially the access to our coast and ocean. I would also like to highlight the importance of restoration work as mentioned in the panel. Blue carbon restoration like saltgrass and sea marsh is going to be essential, and I encourage the state to take that into account when looking at the 30 by 30 initiative, and also taking into account and informing those decisions with science, including carbon sequestration studies. And finally, in managing our marine protected areas, it is important to know what humans are doing, the human use of our coastal and marine resources. And to that end, I'd like to make sure that everybody is aware of the Marine Protected Area Watch Network, a network of programs that train volunteers to collect community science data of our coastal and marine resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And next we have Wayne Kauto.
Hi, just checking to make sure you can hear me.
Yes.
Hi, Wayne Cotto with Coastal Conservation Association of California. We appreciate the opportunity to offer 90 seconds of public comment, but this does not resemble anything close to the meaningful engagement anticipated in the executive order or promised by the stakeholders by the resource agency. The executive order issued 10 months ago and calls for a report with developed strategies in a little more than 5 months. Where is the real stakeholder engagement? We do not disagree with much of the summary document. Protecting biodiversity is good for the ocean and thus good for the recreation. Fisheries management should be ecosystem-based and to be mindful of protecting even those species that we do not target. Yet the panel seems unaware that much of these goals are already addressed in fisheries management, directly or indirectly. The panel calls for more protection for rocky habitat, but 43% of the coastal rocky substrate in Southern California is already fully protected. By calling for more protected areas, the panel puts the cart before the horse. It assumes that the California recreational anglers pose a threat to biodiversity when they do not. Any process that starts with the adverse conclusion excludes stakeholders, lacks objectivity and credibility. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. The last name on this slide is Susan Kirks. Okay, let's move to our next set of speakers, please. Thank you. We have Nick Krieger, Sander Cushion, Chris Malin, Lionel Mares. Nick Krieger, Sander Cushion, Chris Malin, and Lionel Mares. I see we have Sander. Go ahead, Sander.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sander. I am the state advocate with CalPIRG, a nonprofit advocating for laws and policies to create a greener and healthier future for all Californians. First off, thank you to the facilitators and panelists for this discussion. We want to also voice our support for the 30 by 30 plan. I just love California's beaches. When my friends visit from out of state, they are blown away. They've never seen anything like it. I grew up in Southern California, and I think most people, including myself, have a really deep emotional connection to the ocean. It's a part of who we are as Californians. I'm sure many here know this. The indigenous populations that were mentioned earlier certainly know this as well. On the topic of some of the greatest threats to coastal and marine biodiversity, one that CalPIRG is currently working to address is plastic pollution. I'm sure many of you have heard stats about how we are on track to have more plastic than fish in the oceans by 2050 if the current levels of production stay the same. And the reality is a lot of these single-use materials we could really easily live without. So we're currently working to pass bills at the local and state levels that would ban non-recyclable packaging, takeout materials, and other single-use packaging to protect our oceans. But in the end, the public CalPIRG are all on your side here. We're so encouraged by the work so far and the amazing data-driven conservation efforts you all highlighted. Thanks again.
Thank you. I see we have Nick Krieger. Go ahead, Nick.
Hi. So I'm concerned that there's no commercial fishermen representation on the panel. I'd also like to say that the California fishing industry not only provides jobs to coastal communities, but it also provides sustainable seafood to all Californians. If access to fisheries are restricted, I think Californians will be forced to eat more imported fish, which is often from Asia. Imported and farmed fish have a huge environmental impact, both in production and transportation. And I think those would be counterproductive to your goals. So I think there should definitely be more representation from stakeholders. And I think you guys should also consider some of the larger implications of restricting access. Thank you.
Thank you. Left on this slide are Chris Malin and Lionel Mares. Okay, let's move to our next set of speakers, please. We have Karen Martin, Candace Menigan, Margaret Meinke, Todd Mitchell, Chris Mitten, Karen Martin, Candace Menigan, Margaret Meinke, Todd Mitchell, and Chris Mitten. Karen, go ahead and provide your comment, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Karen Martin with the Beach Ecology Coalition. California's sandy beaches benefit humans' health and well-being in many ways, as we just heard. Beaches are greatly threatened by sea level rise and climate change. Although they may have less biodiversity than other coastal habitats, they are critical for many mammals, birds, fishes, reptiles, and plants, and integral to the food web linking marine and terrestrial ecosystems. Sandy beaches function within the network of coastal ecosystems, including tidal wetlands, estuaries, kelp forests, and seagrass beds. Many species move between these habitats at different points in their life cycles. It's vital to include areas with sandy beaches in the 30 by 30 plans. I also wanted to address the enthusiasm for citizen or community science I heard during the presentations and in just a recent comment. As the director of a California citizen science program for almost 2 decades, I agree that these data are incredibly valuable and may not be obtainable in any other way, especially in remote areas. To be clear, however, in addition to support for data portals and data management, programs must also support the volunteers themselves by providing feedback, education, and recognition. Regular communications are necessary to maintain engagement and to clarify observations. Well-planned community science efforts could be very valuable within the 30 by 30 initiative. Thank you for your time and good work.
Thank you. Next we have, Candace Menigan. Go ahead, Candace.
Hi, my name is Candace Minigan, representing Coastal Ranchers Conservancy along the Gaviota coast. And we are here to support 30 by 30. And I'd like to thank the panelists who spoke today and through the other workshops as well. We want to highlight that 45% of California's salmon, steelhead, and trout will be extinct within the next 45 years. That's based on a California Trout and UC Davis Watershed Science Center report that came out several years ago. And specifically with regards to federally endangered Southern California steelhead, with climate change and anthropogenic challenges such as dams, land use change, and urbanization, and estuary alteration, these are all highlighted, and specifically along the Gaviota coast, for us to restore the species, we are engaging resource agencies such as Caltrans to prioritize fish passage barrier removal in coastal watersheds. And we appreciate that there is the recognition of the coastal waters and coastal watersheds and that interplay with the anadromous species. But we also see that there is a heightened need to enhance our estuaries along the coast. And when speaking to how to collaborate, I think there is urgency in how the Natural Resource Agency is going to work with nonprofits and NGOs to leverage public-private partnerships and implement necessary actions at the expedited needs to address climate change accordingly.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Chris Mitten.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Chris Mitten. I'm the Western Region Public Policy Manager for the National Marine Manufacturers Association. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on this matter of utmost importance to my members. Sustainable access to outdoor recreation allows the public to connect with lands, waters, and wildlife, and also provides social, economic, and conservation benefits to the nations. According to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the outdoor recreation economy generates $57 billion in economic output, comprising 2% of California's GDP, supporting over 600,000 jobs and $30 billion in compensation. The outdoor recreation community is proud of our longstanding commitment to the conservation that has helped support the United States and as a global leader in natural resource and biodiversity protection. Well-managed, sustainable outdoor activities are in harmony with the 30 by 30 goals and continue to support jobs and economic activity in communities across the country, while areas are conserved for climate solutions. Maintaining the sense of connection to our abundant natural resources and unrivaled natural beauty that these activities provide is essential to ensuring we have a natural resource and biodiversity stewards for the next generation. With that, we recommend the inclusion of protected area definitions that allow for well-managed and sustainable outdoor activity, and the consideration of existing protected areas in measuring progress towards stated goals, and an objective, science-driven stakeholder engagement process to determine the appropriate level of management necessary to meet biodiversity and conservation goals while supporting sustainable recreation. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Next, let's see if we have the remaining folks on this slide. Margaret Meinke and Todd Mitchell. Okay, let's move on to our next set of speakers, please. We have Tom Moore, Marcia Moutry, Devin O'Day, Dick Ogg, Emily Parker. Tom Moore, Marcia Moutry, Devin O'Day, Dick Ogg, Emily Parker. All right, I see Dick Ogg. Go ahead and provide your comment, please.
Can you hear me, Debbie?
Yes, I can.
Is it echoing?
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
All right.
Oh, you just muted yourself.
Well, let's try it again.
There we go. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. My name is Dick Ogg. I'm a commercial fisherman here in Bodega Bay. First, I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm hearing an echo. I don't know.
You're coming in fine, I think.
Okay.
So just go ahead.
All right. I'll continue to talk then. Okay. I've lived in Sonoma County for some 60 years and have fished and dove along our coastline for 45 of those 60 years. I understand the need for biodiversity in the 30/30 plan, but I feel there's a resource that is underutilized, the years of expertise and experience of the commercial fishing fleet. There lies in historical information and on the water data that can help inform the changes in the ocean conditions. Real-time information that is relevant to what is occurring now from near shore to offshore. I just want to emphasize that our objective is to provide a sustainable organic resource to the public. Please know that we are true conservationists and help us continue support for our local economy, local economies and our families. Also help us create an environmental collaboration to interact that will promote tradition of the truly hundreds of years that has occurred as commercial fishermen. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, Marcia Moutry. Go ahead, Marcia. Marcia, can you unmute yourself?
I'm sorry, I thought I had. Thank you, Debbie, and thank you all for your work. I'm an attorney. I work with the Earth Law Center. Our work includes supporting the United Nations Harmony with Nature program, and we focus on incorporating ecocentric perspectives into law, including through the recognition of nature's rights to exist and evolve. I want to start by speaking to your questions. As to the biggest threat, I think the biggest threat to preserving marine life along the California coast is a public misapprehension of what nature is to us and what we are to it. It's not our property, it's our life support, and we need to take care of it as such. As to habitats at risk, my first choice for your attention would be the kelp forests. We need to protect the forests that are on the planet, on land and at sea. And there are some really interesting efforts going on here in Southern California to restore and protect those forests. As to additional measures in the category of spatial management, I'm going to agree with, let's see, Sandra, Bruce, Moises, and others. I think that the Chumash National Marine Sanctuary should be recognized for protection, as should the estuaries to the Smith and Klamath Rivers in the far northern part of California. Finally, I'd like to ask that in doing your work, I feel quite sure that you'll come up with solid policies, but you need to help people understand that we all share a responsibility for nature's welfare. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Devin O'Day. Devin, please unmute yourself and provide your comment.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to present comment here, and thank you to all the panelists. My name is Devin O'D. I'm the California chapter coordinator for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, a nonprofit dedicated to our wild public lands, waters, and wildlife. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to emphasize and advocate for data-driven scientific management of our coastal marine resources. The panel emphasized the need for data collection and citizen science programs. Some others have mentioned this as well, but the angling community in California contributes millions of dollars to support fish populations and habitat in the state and in our oceans. And we help to provide our state agencies with important harvest data to make informed management decisions. I hope that the state will continue to utilize anglers on our coast and will continue to maintain public access to fish for species that our state fish and wildlife managers have deemed to have sustainable population levels. Thank you very much and appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for your comment. So I see a phone number. The last four digits are 0197. So I'm gonna allow you to talk. Please let me know who you are on this list and provide your comment. Phone number 0197. Are you able to unmute yourself? Okay, I'm gonna. Oh. Hello? All right, phone caller, if you are still here, I'm going to encourage you to call our technical support number if you need technical support, and maybe they can help you out. Otherwise, call back in and raise your hand again. The number is 858-522-9702. Let's see, the remaining names on this list are Tom Moore and Emily Parker. Okay, we will move on to our next set of speakers, please. We have Radha Patel, Brian Pendleton, Jim Pugh, Zach Plopper, Matthew Polverosa Klein. Radha Patel, Brian Pendleton, Jim Pugh, Zach Plopper, Matthew Polverosa Klein. Radha Patel, go ahead and provide your comment, please.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Radha. I'm a fourth year student at UCLA. I want to thank the panelists for their discussion on protecting oceanic diversity and their support with the 30 by 30 plan. As we know, the US West Coast has a vast diversity of marine species that hold as pillars to our ocean's ecosystem, one being the sea turtles that roam our Pacific coast. Overfishing and human-caused threats has led to an ominous presence to our marine life, including sharks, whales, fishes, and nonetheless sea turtles. Specifically, leatherback sea turtles have declined in population significantly despite their protections under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. Scientists estimate that West Pacific leatherback sea turtles have declined by more than 80% since the 1980s and are anticipated to decline by 96% by 2040. These are turtles that are vulnerable to consuming plastic and affected by climate change. The bill AB 1776 already urges to protect the endangered species from human-caused threats and encourages cooperative conservation measures. To make this bill effective, though, constructing a cohesive plan to protect the species will serve long ways in preserving marine life from the threat of extinction in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Oops. Next we have Jim Pugh. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I'd like to address the question number 1, threats to coastal and marine biodiversity in the next 10 years. From the point of view of intertidal salt marsh, this kind of habitat supports a huge amount of biodiversity, carbon sequestration, water quality improvement, shoreline stabilization. But the problem with it is that the elevation difference between mudflat, low marsh, mid marsh, high marsh, and upland transition is really small. It won't take very many decades before we're up to just having open water and high marsh, and then after that, just having an open water and seawall interface. This would be a huge loss of biodiversity and the other benefits. Arthur Feinstein mentioned the possibility of planning ahead and buying property to allow the shoreline to retreat so that we can continue to have wetlands, which would be really great in the places where that's a real opportunity. But there are lots of other places where it isn't. And we could conceivably add soil to bring the elevation of wetlands up over time. But that'll take a lot of research and a lot of experimentation and a lot of money. So I hope that your output can discuss this problem and suggest that this be a really high priority because it needs to be done really soon. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Next, we have Zach Plopper. Go ahead, Zach.
Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zach Plopper, Associate Director of Wild Coast and Chair of the Blue Carbon Collaborative. I'm also a member of California's MPA Decadal Review Outreach Steering Committee, and I appreciate all the hard work that's going into these topical workshops. I'd like to highlight the importance of our blue carbon ecosystems, specifically our coastal salt marsh and seagrass, and the surrounding habitat in achieving California's 30 by 30 goals. These are obviously incredible areas for wildlife. They provide essential ecosystem services. Unfortunately, they're among the most threatened in California. Sea level rise poses one of the biggest threats that could render our coastal wetlands ineffective at capturing and storing carbon, in addition to ruining the rich essential habitat and outdoor opportunities for communities that they provide. So we encourage the California Natural Resources Agency to prioritize the adaptive conservation of our coastal wetlands, of our blue carbon ecosystems, particularly in the context of sea level rise in this 30 by 30 effort, and to look at novel ways of protecting these critical resources. We look forward to providing more comment in writing, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Next, we have Matthew Pulverosa Klein.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
My name is Matthew Pulveros Klein. I'm a wildlife photographer and naturalist living near Point Reyes National Seashore. This 30 by 30 campaign is desperately needed. Thank you to everyone involved. Nevertheless, learning from current experience fighting to restore Point Reyes, I'm skeptical how much it can succeed. I say this out of concern because here in the only national seashore on the West Coast, our very own California Coastal Commission gave approval for a short-sighted and completely unscientific park management plan. I know this plan is not a state plan, nevertheless, it impacts state waters and linkages, numerous native wildlife, fragile ecosystems like endangered coastal prairie, kelp forests, seagrass meadows, and more, all of which we know are interconnected and critically important to California's natural heritage. Such things pay no attention to park borders or state and federal designations. I hope the people working on this campaign will show up right now when California's coast needs you most. Please push your key contacts to stop the dishonorable MPS Alternative B plan in Point Reyes. Our seashore is one of the most biodiverse and geographically significant stretches of California coastline. We need key decision makers to connect the dots between eutrophication of waterways by agricultural runoff and the threat this poses to marine eelgrass, the impacts to snowy plover populations by agricultural operations. These are just a few examples. Lastly, I ask that this 30 by 30 effort prioritize biodiversity and environmental health above all else. Please keep the conservation mission of this 30 by 30 vision intact. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like we have Todd Mitchell, who was listed on the previous slide. Todd, go ahead and unmute yourself and provide your comment, please.
Yeah, this is Brian Pendleton, General Manager for the Ventura Port District.
Okay.
Thank you. Todd Mitchell is our Business Operations Manager.
Okay.
So Ventura Port District owns and operates Ventura Harbor, which is home to one of the largest commercial fishing fleets in the state. The governor's executive order has a key goal of safeguarding the state's economic sustainability and food security. Managed fisheries and aquaculture are critical to this effort. California is the largest consumer of seafood in the U.S., and current state production lags far behind demand. Shortfalls are met by importation, which contributes to the state and national seafood deficit and increases our carbon footprint by requiring the transportation of seafood into the state from around the world, often from locations with little or no environmental protections. California fisheries and aquaculture are already highly regulated industries managed by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, NOAA, the Pacific Fisheries Management Council, and others. These stringent regulatory processes are intended to ensure that fisheries and aquaculture do not have negative effects on species or biodiversity. In fact, there is significant science that aquaculture supports biodiversity through establishing additional structured habitat for a variety of species. Managed fisheries and sustainable aquaculture should be considered allowed uses in any areas that the state considers for additional protection. Failure to do so would result in significant and permanent economic impacts to our coastal economies that rely upon fisheries and aquaculture, would increase our carbon footprint, and significantly impact our long-term food security. These interests must be considered by the state in its conservation of any additional state waters. We will be providing additional comment in writing, and thank you very much for the opportunity today.
Thank you for your comment. At this point, we still have about 12 more registered speakers. We are going to take a short 10-minute break, both for you all, for our listeners from CNRA, and for our tech support folks behind the scene. When we come back, we will take the remaining registered speakers. So if you registered to speak, you will still get to speak. And we also will have time to take at least some speakers, some folks who would like to speak but did not pre-register. And then when we come back, my colleague Ivana Rosas will take over. So let's come back at 5:40 to continue hearing public comment. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to our topical workshop on the conservation of coastal waters. We will continue with our public comment portion. And so if we could please have the next round of speakers who pre-registered on the screen, that would be great. Thank you so much. We have Michael Popoff, Charles Schaefer, Steve Schleibauer, Donna Sinauer. And I apologize if that is not the pronunciation of your names or last names, but please correct me if you are on the call. Again, we have Michael Popoff, Charles Schaefer, Steve Schleibauer, and Donna Sinauer. All right, we have Charles on the line. I'm gonna ask you to unmute and you can then provide your comment.
Okay, I'm ready to go?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, my name's Charles Schaefer and I'm with the Sierra Club in the Loma Prieta chapter. I want to thank you for working on the 30 by 30. I think it's a great program. My primary concern and reason for calling is sea level rise around the San Francisco Bay. I'm really encouraged by the emphasis that was placed on protecting biodiversity, the need for proper management of areas that are being conserved, and the fact that we need buffer for projected stressors. Sea level rise is really one of those stressors. So we need to be looking at what we can do to protect from sea level rise. And to me, the San Francisco Bay is a prime candidate for consideration. The bay itself is managed by the Bay Conservation Development Corporation, but the lands abutting it are not. As the buffer needed, so the buffers needed to be managed are managed by local entities who have local priorities that can differ from the regional priorities, especially when it comes to development. So some policies, some cities may resort to gray infrastructure, which can drown natural biodiversity and make it more difficult for their neighbors since it reflects tidal action.
Great, thank you so much for your comment, Michael. Your time is now up.
Okay.
Appreciate you. Thank you. I'm sorry, Charles. We also have, I'm going to read out the names one more time: Michael Popoff, Steve Schleibauer, and Donna Sinauer. Reminder for folks on the phone, if you would like to raise your hand, please press *9 so that you can indicate to raise your hand if you are here and would like to speak. I think we can move on to the next few folks we have lined up. Thank you. Isabella Sadin Miller, Jen Simmons, Mark Smith, Ellen Taylor, and Hannah Tikalski. We have Ellen Taylor on the line. Please go ahead and provide your comment.
Good evening. I'm Ellen Taylor from the Lost Coast League. I've spoken at all of 4 previous seminars. And this time I'd like to address a factor which is hardly ever referred to, which is the offshore Navy exercises. As you probably know, the Navy produces a huge carbon footprint, and there are only 5 nations that produce more carbon emissions than the Navy itself. Its activities out at sea are unregulated, basically because it's the Navy, and people don't like to interfere with something which Congress and the Senate accept across the board without any reductions in their military budget or any other interferences. The sea has become acid. and the climate has become warm. This is bad for the biodiversity and affects even anadromous fish and fish which migrate from forest lands, and private landowners own much of the headwaters of the salmon streams and the lamprey eel streams, and the forest practice rules are antiquated, so they don't offer adequate protection for these species in their habitat, so that it naturally affects their survival out at sea. Somebody mentioned that the salmon species will be extinct by 2045, and this is of tremendous concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Hannah Tokalski on the line. Please provide your comment. Hannah, it looks like you are unmuted, but we cannot hear you. I would like to recommend that you check your microphone settings once you unmute yourself. If you are on that web app, or you can click on the little up arrow that is next to the microphone icon and test your speaker there. So I'm going to go ahead and let you focus on setting that up while I address a speaker who was called on in the previous slide, Steve Scheibluser. I'm sorry, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly. I believe you were on the line, and I'm going to allow you to talk. You have indicated in the chat that you would like to speak.
Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can hear you. Go
Yes,
ahead.
thank you. Yeah, I am Steve Scheibluser. I'm a person who had a 55-year-long work career on, next to, and in the water, California's ocean waters. And I have three comments. My first is regarding ecosystem-based management, that if this process is in fact embracing that, I certainly hope that you'll take into account some of the large federal actions offshore California, outside of state waters, that very much affect California waters. And these are actions that have protected habitat. And in particular, some of them have really directly responsible for the fact that the groundfish complex has come roaring back here, benefiting everybody. Excuse me. My next comment is about that I still find myself confused about what the definition of conservation or conserve is that's being used here. And it seems to be commingled quite often with protection, the concept of protection. And I do think they're different things. And so I would really like clarification of that. And I will say that by my knowledge of conservation, which is largely centered around sustainable uses, that if that's the case, then we largely have what we're looking for already. And then lastly, I hope at some point this process embraces the question of societal trade-offs, where we do accept certain consequences to biodiversity, other thing, in exchange for things that we need. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Steve. It looks like, Hannah, you were able to resolve your audio issues, so please go ahead and provide your comment. You can also click around to see if you select that up arrow, you can also click the other options for audio. We are still not hearing you, Hannah, so we will come back to you in the next round. May we have the next slide, please? So we have Christina Toms, Robert Jan Roy van de Hoek, Janelle Vidal, and Louis Zim. Are any of you all on this call and would like to provide comments at this time? Robert, I see you are here. I will allow you to speak now. Can you unmute yourself? Great.
Hello and good afternoon, and thank you for having this. My name is Roy. Full name is Robert Jan van de Hoek. I'm an immigrant, naturalized citizen from Nederland, and I'm a wildlife biologist and scientist for 40 years in federal, state, county, and local governments. I was an LA County Fish and Game Warden as well for several years on Catalina Island. So we're on occupied territory of the Tongva and Chumash, where I'm speaking from, but the whole state is occupied by our United States and our Euro-Americans on Indigenous peoples. And I believe that Indigenous people should get double or triple the amount of time to speak as opposed to the rest of us. And I believe they're the only ones that should be allowed to hunt in the state of California for their research, hunt and gather plants on public lands for their use culturally, medicinally, spiritually related, and for food. Wow, 30 seconds left, 1 minute gone already, unbelievable. So other than acquiring land and that, the second biggest thing to do is to end hunting, both commercially and sports hunting. And successes in not having hunting have been the gray whale has come back. We're now at 200,000 seals and sea lions in the state of California, which mimics that. And we need to have sea otters brought back to Southern California. There right now a state law that says no otters south of Point Conception. So, and we need to have them in our marinas and harbors. They love clams, and the proof is from the Monterey Aquarium. Thank you for that little bit of extra seconds. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Robert. I wanted you to finish off that sentence. Appreciate that, your comment very much. And so let's give Hannah another shot here to speak. Hopefully we can figure out the technical difficulties. Again, sometimes you have to just click around to see what the other options are, whether it's your computer audio or your speakers as well. Sometimes that helps. Hannah, while you play around with that, I will say that that was the last of our pre-registered speakers. And so we will now take members of the public who wish to provide public comment or public input who did not have the opportunity to pre-register. Those interested in providing a 90-second oral comment can raise their hand and be added to the queue. I will take folks in the order that they appear on the list, which Zoom automatically does sort of first come situation. And as a reminder, if you are on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand over the phone. So Hannah, it looks like you might have hopped off of the call and might be rejoining via phone. So hopefully we'll get you back. Next in line to speak is George Osborne. Thank you very much for your patience, and you will now have 90 seconds to provide your comment.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. George Osborne, representing the Coastside Fishing Club. The recreational fishing community supports the conservation of biodiversity because those efforts lead to healthy, robust, and abundant fisheries. We're conservationists first and foremost, and since long before other organizations discovered needs to protect our coastal waters. We are not, however, preservationists, nor do we see the governor calling for preservation in the executive order. Our concern is that the trajectory of this process may lead to reduced recreational access without evidence of its nexus to the biodiversity crisis. The summary document broadly references extensive loss and degradation of coastal or nearshore habitats. Coastal development has certainly taken its toll on shoreline and estuarine environments. How has recreational fishing compromised biodiversity? And to what extent are existing adaptive management measures inadequate? What is the current level of biodiversity protection? These are questions that the panel should have addressed rather than instantly embracing more MPAs as a solution. Since the goal is conservation and not preservation, solutions exist, short of eliminating recreational access. In fact, a
Great.
census of
Thank
existing
you.
measures.
Thank you, George. Your time is up.
Thank you.
Appreciate your comment. All right, next in line, we have we have Sherry Flumerfelt. I will ask you to unmute yourself to provide your comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Sherry Flummerfelt, and I'm with the Monterey Bay Fisheries Trust, a nonprofit that's working to advance the social, economic, and environmental sustainability of Monterey Bay fisheries. Commercial fishing is a huge part of the history, the culture, the economy of California's coastal communities, and it's essential for our food security, as COVID-19 recently illustrated when international supply chains broke down. Not to mention the hundreds of thousands of healthy seafood meals that have been donated by California fishing groups to local food banks. I would like to reiterate what some of the speakers have said before me, which is the importance of involving commercial and recreational fishing stakeholders in any discussion around 30 by 30. They're on the water every day. They're the first to see changes, and they know more than anyone what existing rules and regulations work or don't work. And they have an intimate knowledge of the ocean that rivals top marine scientists. One of your questions is about what sustainable fisheries management tools work. Well, we have the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act and the Regional Fishery Management Councils, which incorporate extensive stakeholder involvement. This works, but you have to give sufficient opportunities for stakeholders to be involved. Fishermen can't always attend webinars in the middle of the day. And of course, it's hard for anyone to provide meaningful input within minutes. But there are groups like ours that would be happy to help to reach out to these stakeholders to ensure that their important input is contributed. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Sherry. Next we have Shauna McCovey. If you could please, oops, I unmuted the incorrect person. Give me one moment. Shauna, there you are. Please provide your comment.
Hi, thank you. My name is Shauna McCovey, and I'm the Director of Natural Resources and Governmental Affairs at Resigini Rancheria, and I'm a tribal person. I have the distinct honor of working with Megan Van Pelt, but this isn't the first time we've worked together on ocean and coastal stewardship. We often talk about how far the state has come since 2009, when it embarked upon the Marine Life Protection Act initiative, and we were told that they couldn't consult with Indian tribes. As a result, we set out to organize tribes on the North Coast to be able to participate fully in the process, and Megan actually wrote the first grant that helped give tribes a voice. Fast forward 12 years now, we have a consultation policy, but what we don't yet have, and the reason for my comment today, is dedicated funding. Tribes are still relying on grant funding to do our ocean and coastal stewardship work. Your summary document mentions funding, but I want to put an emphasis on it because true partnership and true co-management means shared decision-making, and shared decision-making requires dedicated funding for tribes who are working to build their capacity. The Tribal Marine Stewards Network is an example of tribes working toward co-management and eventual management of tribal ocean and coastal territories. There are examples of Indigenous networks such as this in Australia and Canada. And in fact, this week, the Canadian government announced $340 million in new funding over 5 years to support Indigenous-led conservation and stewardship. Tribally driven stewardship and traditional management programs need this kind of investment by the state and federal governments in order to continue to do the work necessary to protect our resources for future generations. So I urge the state leadership to help us find a way to secure permanent funding for this work. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Shauna. Now, the floor again is still open for folks who would like to give comment. If you are on the phone, please press *9 to indicate that you would like to speak. Otherwise, it looks like we might be coming to a close of our time here today. I'll give it just few more moments here. I am not seeing any other raised hands. And so At this time, I would like to thank you all for your participation. A meeting summary will be prepared that will include the input provided today, and it will be posted on the project website and shared with participants. You will also receive a post-meeting survey for you to provide your feedback on this workshop. Again, thank you so much for your participation tonight. I will now turn it over to Mark and Jen for any final comments they may have.
Go ahead, Mark, you can go first.
Oh, thanks, Jen. Well, first of all, thank you to everybody for really your very thoughtful comments and remarks. We greatly appreciate it. We've heard people loud and clear, and we understand the concern that people have about not having representation on a panel, or there being some other sort of process that's going on in parallel with this. The point of the panels, just to remind people, was to really get scientific and management expertise and have them do their work independently. And that's what happened. You didn't have a situation where really anyone was looking over the shoulders of the esteemed panelists who were doing this work. And that's not just true for ocean conservation. It's really true for all the effort that's occurred so far. And so it's tried to be as independent as possible. There hasn't been really stakeholder engagement has really been in this process and really having enormous number of meetings and really trying to solicit as much verbal and written feedback as possible. And obviously with such short time frame, we understand, 90 seconds is not enough to express your ideas and concerns and support. And so we really, again, strongly encourage you to send your comments in a written manner so that we can actually see them directly. That'd be very, very helpful to us. So we haven't started meeting with individual stakeholders at all. This is not the MLPA process. So from the standpoint of doing things in that way, it's on a very different time frame and a different way. But I really want to close again with thanking everybody for their ideas, because there were a lot of innovative ideas that were expressed here today, and we greatly appreciate it. And for you really taking the time to read the document and provide such cogent feedback. So thank you so much. Jen?
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate that. And thanks to the facilitators and the translators and the members of the panel, and of course the members of the public. We're really grateful for your engagement. This is a big, complex process. We're definitely, as Mark said, taking a lot of input now. We're going to also have a draft out in the fall. Absolutely going to be looking for your feedback on whether we got it right. And most importantly, we really hope to be working together in partnership on implementation. This Pathways document is a framework, and really at the end of the day, the work happens in real life on the ground as we figure out what the appropriate places are to conserve together. So I look forward to that future. Again, thank you so much for your participation tonight, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you all very much. This session is now ending.